to the Unleash Success podcast, where we break down the secrets of success to give you real tools and strategies that get real results. And now, here's your host, Corey Corpodian.
Okay, welcome back to Unleash Success. Today's episode, we're going to jump back in time to a live interview I did at this year's annual podcast movement event. The episode is really focused on a few key points about success that I find extremely important. So in the first portion of this episode, I'm going to go over the 3 takeaways for success. And then after that, we'll jump into the interview. So the 3 keys from this episode are 1, always say yes to an opportunity. 2, success requires you to get out of your comfort zone. And 3, the power of live immersive events. So step 1, something we've always known. It's great to say yes. You know, I've known this too, but what really allowed me to embody this was after I watched the Yes Man movie with Jim Carrey. You know, at the time, it's just a comedy, but I started to say, I'm a yes man. And that identity is really powerful and helpful towards accomplishing your goals. I think saying yes is so powerful. Of course, you have to know when to say yes and when to say no. My motto is this: say yes to have the courage to go after your dreams, but say no to the distraction that stops you. And along these lines, I was definitely scared about starting a podcast. You know, truthfully, I had this idea over a year ago. I did hours of research, probably tens of hours of research, maybe even 100, bought the equipment, made an artwork logo, and created a landing page. Basically everything but create the podcast. And I thought back and I said, you know, out of fear, I let other work stop me from starting my passion. But then I created the courage to say yes to my dream. On my 31st birthday, I gave myself the gift of saying yes to launching a podcast. And the first step to launch was me paying to attend Podcast Movement. You know, saying yes was one of the best decisions of my life. I've met some of my favorite podcasters like Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas. By the way, I may have even gotten an interview with JLD himself. And what happened when I said yes was a decision and commitment to podcasting. In fact, I said I would create at least 100 episodes, even if only my girlfriend listens to them. But once I aligned with my goals and took action, I got to interview people like Tom Bilyeu from Quest Nutrition, who I started following years ago when I was competing in men's fitness. See, I love the interview process and I learn so much every time. In fact, every time I step into the podcast zone, I feel so much passion for life. It's freaking awesome. So another thing I said yes to was the opportunity to do a live recording at Podcast Movement, checking out some new mics. Now, I have an interview-based show, but at this point of signing up, I had not interviewed anyone. I didn't even know anyone at the Podcast Movement. None of my friends had podcasts, and I just had no clue I was going to interview and what we would even talk about. But becoming successful requires you to get out of your comfort zone. And man, I was way out of my comfort zone. Everyone I talked to knew way more about podcasting than I did. I met so many people, but wasn't sure if anyone would be good to interview or what we'd even talk about. And if I failed, I was scared, but at least I wouldn't regret it. So of course, I thought if I succeeded, well, then this podcast would be awesome. And that's why you have got to get out of your comfort zone and take a chance. Over the first 2 days, I met tons of amazing people. The night before, talking to 2 guys, I asked them if they would join me for an early 8 a.m. interview. And it was out of my comfort zone to ask 2 people I just met to be interviewed, especially since to this point, I had never even done a 2-person interview, and I'd always known or researched people that I interviewed beforehand. This leads me to the power of live events and networking. See, I truly believe that you should all attend live events to help you get out of your comfort zone, to get fresh ideas, and meet amazing like-minded people. Now, I might be slightly biased as I did meet my girlfriend at an event. So the fascinating thing about immersive live events is the power they have to accelerate our success. Now, immersive live events I define as ones that completely immerse you in the material for at least 1 full day. But personally, I prefer to be in there for 2 or more days. The reason for this is because when you go home and sleep, you actually integrate what you've learned, and the next day you become better than ever, and you're able to apply that. Unfortunately, people go to a 2-hour event, they get motivated, and then they go back to their normal lives, and nothing changed. See, real change is more easily created when you're immersed in a different environment for a period of time. If you ever went to camp as a kid or went away to college, took an intensive training program, or even played a sport like football where we do Hell Week to prepare for the season, you know you can change your abilities by intensely focusing on that one area of life for a period of time. That's what immersive live events do for you. And that's what I love. They help compound conscious learning with unconscious learning to accelerate your success as well as build momentum towards your goals. And of course, the best thing about live events is networking and meeting new people. So in this episode, we're going to meet two great guys that I met at Podcast Movement this year. Had I not gone to this event, we never would have created this episode. So always say yes to an opportunity to improve your life. In fact, the best investment is one in yourself. Now, of course, I was worried that this episode wouldn't go as planned. I didn't know what we were really going to talk about, but I had the opportunity and I had to get out of my comfort zone for the chance to be successful. By the day we recorded this episode, my mind was so tuned into podcasting from being immersed in the event that I felt better than ever about interviewing them. So join me as I interview Drew Adams from American Podcast Company in North Carolina. He produces the Pop Tea podcast and hosts the Tobacco Road Sports podcast. And also joining us today is Anthony McKinley, all the way from the UK. Anthony is the creative director for Abrupt Audio, where he helped create several different very popular podcasts in the UK. And remember, guys, this was a live interview done at the event. As the interview went on, you'll definitely hear people walking by, talking, and networking themselves. So let's jump right in. All right. Welcome to the Unleash Success podcast. We are recording live from Podcast Movement. Thanks to Shure for recording this on their brand new mics and the talk shoe. We're doing the live recording here at the Podcast Pavilion. With me, I have Drew from the American Podcasting Company and Ant from the UK. He runs a audio company and has a network of podcasting shows. So welcome, guys.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having us. Great to talk.
I'm super excited today because I really want to talk about the power of coming to an event like this. A lot of people don't always take the time out of life to really try and maximize their potential or to do it in an immersive event where we're coming to something for 3 or 4 days. So I'm curious to start off, Drew, what brought you to the podcast movement here?
Sure. Well, first, I host a podcast called the Tobacco Road Sports Podcast, and then I really enjoyed that. So then I decided I'd like to produce another show. So I produced a show called the Pop Tea Podcast, which is a show about pop culture. And I found that I enjoy producing as much or even more than hosting. But to answer your question about why to come to the podcast movement, one is just the energy, right? You're surrounded with people who believe in this medium, and you have people who are new to it, and then you have people who have a lot of experience in it, but there's sort of a sense of joy about the whole thing. So you get to share with people on all different types of levels, and you get to talk about specific topics specific to kind of what we face when we're doing podcasting that you might have to seek out in other venues, but you get it all in one place. So it's the energy, I think, that really is the great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in a workshop yesterday, and they were showing stats from 2008, how only 37% of Americans even heard of a podcast.
Right.
And now in 2015 stats, roughly, it's 47% of Americans listen to a podcast.
Right.
So it's obviously drastically increased in popularity. And same thing, like you were saying, we were in a room. I've been podcasting in my own room by myself,
right.
And now I'm in a room with 50 people, meeting all these other podcasters, learning from everybody else, and the energy has just been fantastic.
Well, that's the other thing is that the growth of podcasting, and you talk about the connected car, right? And as right now, your cell phone will connect to your dashboard, and they'll play whatever you've been listening to on the phone. So the way I sort of see, just like television, it was sort of you have Netflix, which is on-demand media. You'll also have on-demand radio with the podcasts, right? That's pretty inside the connected car. So the point is that even when I want to tell this real quick story, which was even on the way over here when I was driving on the shuttle bus from the airport to the hotel. The driver of the shuttle bus didn't turn on the radio for all of us in the shuttle bus to listen to. He turned on his cell phone and he played YouTube songs. These songs streamed from YouTube. Now, they weren't podcasts, right? There wasn't a talk radio, but the point is that the radio was kind of off to the side, and he was getting his listening content from the cell phone through the internet, and that's just going to progress and get even better.
Absolutely.
More, I think, anyway. Do you think so?
There's so much changing right now. I mean, I just started this podcast. You've got 2, and now I'm going to take it over to Ant, and I'm going to let you introduce how many podcasts you have, because you're obviously growing at a massive rate, just show after show.
Yeah, although comparatively, those stats that you gave for America in the UK were so far behind, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here. For example, I think, our total downloads last year for the UK matched sort of 1 month's worth of Serial. It's just crazy. I mean, obviously Serial was very popular in the UK as well, but just the amount of people that are actually engaged with podcasts and listening to them and downloading them regularly is so small compared. Now, obviously there's a population issue, but one of the reasons why I'm here is to try and figure out, is there a trick that we're missing in the UK? Is there a cultural difference we need to address? Is it just that, you guys have got a little more experience, or I don't know, that little pizzazz that we're missing? I'm not sure. But in terms of why am I here, I couldn't not be here. As soon as I found out about this event, I had to be here, because this is a new frontier. This is like the Wild West, and if you're not there, if you're not involved, if you're not taking part, if you're not doing things, it's going to move on. You're going to miss it, and you're going to be so far behind. And I think it's great that you've started your podcast, because a lot of people go, I should have started a few years ago, I should have done that, but start it now, because you're still going to be ahead of the people that haven't done it, and you can only learn every time you do it. And I think coming to something like this, the worst thing you can do is come in and think you know everything. Just come in and see every person that you meet, say hi to them, just have a little chat, have a coffee, take 5 minutes. Nothing may come from it other than a name, but everybody's got something valuable that you can take on.
Yeah. That brings up a really good point. And real quick, I want to just, for everybody who's listening to this, they understand that Serial is just this incredibly powerful and very widely known podcast, but not everybody has been listening to podcasts. And that one show alone, that stat blows my mind, that it had more downloads than the entire podcasters in the UK. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know at the end of this event what you find out that's the difference.
Oh man, seriously, as soon as I find it out, I'm gonna be doing a lecture tour in the UK and making a fortune off that. I mean, it's a very significant figure for me, because I've set up a company. Not just by myself, I've got a great business partner and a couple of guys that work really hard with us, and we've really built something, and we've taken a group of shows together collectively, and they're like our core, and then we use that as a calling card to train people how to use podcasts, and also then to create podcasts for businesses as a marketing tool. And the fact that, if we can get more people listening to podcasts, it creates a bigger market for me. It's a no-brainer situation.
Podcasts have been a fantastic marketing tool for a lot of entrepreneurs, actually, and they've mentioned that as one of the few. I was just talking to John Lee Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire, and he was saying that was one of the big things that I actually, he created Entrepreneur on Fire as a podcast, and from that, he's built an entire business. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, John's story is great. I've still to meet John. Obviously, he was doing things yesterday, and I was in another room, another session. But John's the king of the online webinar, and he's got so much information in there, and what he does now is very different to how he started, but you can get so much inspiration from that first 6 months of John's journey into podcasting, and as big as he is now, he'll tell you he was terrified. He kept putting back his launch date, he kept putting it back.
Speaking of that, I actually myself came up with this podcast a year ago. I bought the equipment, I had a logo made, I had an intro made, and I didn't even record one single episode.
Right.
And in the span of the last 6 to 8 weeks, this is, the 9th episode that we're recording, and it's live at the Podcast Movement. So I'm super stoked about that. You mentioned something too, just about the power of people. Both of you guys mentioned that, just the energy of people, but also to networking. And not a lot of people can really appreciate how powerful the networking is when you come to an event like this. And I mean, just meeting you guys has been fantastic. What are some of the other bonuses to coming in here, networking, and you just meet people. How's your experience been with that so far?
Oh, my as my mum would say, my head's been turned. I've just been so blown. And yesterday wasn't even the start of the festival; it was the pre-day. It was the soft day, just of the people that are around. And I went from speaking to people that had literally just turned up because their boss found out about the conference last week and sent them over here. And so they're completely a blank slate and they're excited about it and just absorbing and learning, got such great energy. And then the very last person I spoke to last night sat at the bar, a guy called Mike who runs the show Sword and Steel. And he was asking about all my shows, and I was bigging them all up. And then I said, so tell me about your show. And he said, oh, yeah. So we've got 1 million listeners. And I was like, dude, that's a quarter of all the listeners in the UK. I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to add to that. Like with the American Podcast Company, we're interested in understanding what podcasters' points of pain are. So the networking allows you to meet a podcaster, right? And just sort of have an honest conversation about what's hard and what's easy. What do you need help with, right? And that's one benefit of the networking experience.
That brings up a great point. I mean, what are some of the pain points that you found podcasters have?
Right. Well, one I think is podcasters need representation to find. I think there's many podcasters who would like to monetize their podcasts, right?
I think half the lectures on the syllabus for this entire event are monetize your podcast or have grow and monetize in them.
Right. So one thing I've heard is that how do I connect and find the advertisers and deal with that and bring them in and get the ads and so on and so forth. That would be, for example, one point of pain. I think podcasters probably want to continue to grow their audience, right? And so how do you add more listens, more subscribes, and make it more sticky? So that is something that I would like to understand and be able to help with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Drew. I'm curious, actually, as I'm growing my podcast. Mm-hmm. I have not gotten sponsors yet, although today we are at the live recording with TalkShoe, and we've got these Shure mics, and they've been very gracious to do this for us. So they might be considered a sponsor for this podcast, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid for it, but full disclosure.
Sure.
Just wondering, what do I need to do first to grow my podcast even more? And two, then how do I even find sponsors?
Right. So, one thing that I've heard from podcasters is that if the content's good, sometimes the sponsors will come to them. So I guess one piece of advice would be to have a media kit ready so that if they come, you can sort of have, well, this is the number of listeners, this is what we think the demographics are, that sort of thing. So I would say be prepared for success.
Is there a specific number of listeners that you need to even entertain a sponsor?
So my feeling on this is that you could say 20,000 downloads a month would be something amazing. It would be a good number to start with. But for niche podcasts, I think the number is even lower, maybe even well lower than that.
Yeah. And would you?
I totally agree with that. There's a great example of that. I forget his name. The guy who does School of Podcast. He's here.
School of Greatness?
No, the School of Podcasting. He had a guy on a couple of weeks ago on his show who does a show for people who own chameleons. The lizards that change color and all this kind of stuff.
So very niche. So I think there's only 10,000 owners in America.
Yeah.
Right? So that can only ever be his maximum audience. But this guy who did the show started building his own cages for people who had these lizards, and he connected so much with his audience that even though his cages were more expensive than the other ones that are available on the market, he couldn't build the cages fast enough for demand. So he had to stop that business. He just had to shut off the orders. Yeah, and he just, because he connected so well. And that's something we very much found. So we're at a different level in the UK, but there is more money going into it, more money being invested. But the thing that we found is there is this incredible return on investment. So, for example, the usual thing is, if you've got any business, you make 500 phone calls. On the back of that, you're going to get 3 hot leads. Yeah, that's any businessman will tell you that when you're starting out, you put 500 phone calls out, you'll get 3 hot leads. What we found with the podcast is, in some cases, 85% of the listeners that listen regularly to the show will engage with whatever the host is then doing. So one example, gentleman called Mick Tully, who's a very high-level martial artist in the UK. He is over here in the States training all the time, and he runs a show which is badly named, and that's my fault, called Mixed Martial Arts, because everyone goes, sorry, is that M-I-X or M-I-C-K? And he just, I mean, it looked great on paper, but we didn't think that through at the time, but we're with it now. Now, that is an audience of maybe only like, in the first couple of days of release, you're looking at maybe 350 listens to it. But it's one of these shows that people go back to over time, and pretty much every episode we've ever done within a couple of weeks hits over 1,000 listens to it. But that's still a very, very small audience. But when he started doing the show, as well as teaching his regular class in Coventry in the UK, he would go to other classes, other schools in the UK, and sometimes other places in the world, and teach seminars, so a guest teacher. And he would do 6 of these a year, so 1 every 2 months. From starting the podcast to where he is now, he's doing 6 a month. Now, in terms of his personal income, that's a huge lift in what he does. So while he's not making money directly from the podcast, his profile has been lifted so much, and it's not that he's become more of an expert, it's just more people are aware of who he is, what he does, and how connected he is, and that's really pushed him forward. And that's a really interesting side of podcasting. And I would just say, you know, I think it's great that there's money involved, there's sponsors coming involved, but we've got an opportunity here. Podcasting, you can throw the rule book out. We don't have to do adverts in the traditional way. It doesn't have to be a pre-roll, a post-roll, a little ad break in the middle. We can do whatever we want. And the really good example of that, and I highly recommend anybody check it out, is the Panoply podcast, The Message. Okay, so it's like a 10-episode serialized drama. It's done so well. It's a little bit like the Orson Welles War of the Worlds. You're like, is this real? Is this really happening? That's a branded podcast, but you don't realize it's a branded podcast until you get to the end, and there's like a little plot line in about episode 8, and it's about this technique that this medical center uses, and actually the whole show is sponsored and paid for by this medical center who brand the technique.
It's incredible because I'm getting different views, and you know, with how many people you need to actually have a sponsor. And you're right, the rule book is out. It's not like you need to have an advertiser or a sponsor at the beginning, middle, and end of your show. You could have no sponsors. And I know some podcasters only put it at the end of the show because they want to give value to their listeners. And I think that's a huge bonus. I probably would never put something in the beginning. I mean, I won't say never, ever, but unless it was extreme value to the listeners, because I want them to get the content first.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll push back a little bit on that. Like, you know, there's many, you know, very popular podcasts that start off with this podcast has been brought to you by X, like Squarespace, or, you know, is really big right now, or something like this. And I'm not necessarily sure that is something that the listeners don't appreciate. If it's, you know, it's a 15 second ad up front might be very effective and wouldn't necessarily hurt your listenership.
I think if it's adding enough value, right? Is that the...
Yeah, if it's adding value, but also I think listeners would be okay with understanding a little bit up front, I'm going to get to the content in just a second. But granted, some of those podcasts may be more well established at this point. They may already have they're already ready to listen. They have a built-in audience that's going to not mind listening to 15 seconds worth of ads.
Right. So first you have to actually build up your audience, and now you've built a relationship with them and your listener. And if you introduce a 15-second ad, that's probably going to help save money or something. If it's you go to this website, you can download this and you get 20% off. And I've been using it for 6 months, and I think you'll love it. Yeah. Something like that. That's an okay thing. I mean, I say I didn't even want to do it in the beginning. Although when we started this live recording, I was like, thanks a lot to Shure, because now we're using these awesome microphones. Right. I didn't even think about that. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a great point. Is that one of the things that makes podcasting great is that you're talking about niche subjects often, so it's very personal to the podcaster, and the relationship with the audience is very personal, right? So there is the urge and the desire to make sure that anything that you recommend really, really benefits the audience. I'm sure. That's totally.
It's like, why are they even coming here to listen?
Right. So, but if so that's good. I think that's totally tremendous.
I'm curious. We talked about sponsors real quick. I just wonder where do you find them?
Yeah.
I know some people say they approach you, and I'm actually looking around at the podcast movement thinking this would be a great place to find some sponsors at some booths, maybe.
Right,
but
right.
where would you go if you were just starting out or looking for some?
So I think that, a lot of the most successful partnerships would be related to your industry, right? So we could, I was talking to someone, I don't necessarily want to use their, but they're in a particular medical field, and there's a software that is people who are in this field use to manage that, the services that they provide. I think those are the best types of sponsors because they probably find it hard, the advertisers that is, to find an audience that's very specific. They're selling a very specific product. So that's what makes it such a good marriage is you have a podcast that's about a specific topic to a bunch of listeners that are passionate about this topic, and therefore that's a very effective medium for them to advertise. And while podcasting can get a higher revenue per thousand than traditional media.
Right. So thank you guys very much for helping understand, where to get sponsors and the power of networking. I also want to jump into just a specific action that, maybe all of us are taking or something we could do to actually grow the audience of our podcast.
Sure.
So, Ann, what's something that you do to help, grow your audience and spread your episodes so that people can hear this information?
Okay, so I think a thing that a lot of people struggle with is you get stuck in a bubble, and a great example of that is you see this a lot with bands. Now, anybody in a band, we all know somebody who's in a band, maybe been in a band ourselves, great at writing songs, great at doing gigs, not so great at marketing what they do, and they kind of get stuck in a bubble because what they'll do is they'll create up a Facebook group, they'll get everybody involved and go, hey guys, we're playing this date on Saturday, come down, and they get a great response. Everybody comes down like, yay, and then because they're a band and they do gigs all the time, 3 days later they go, hey, we're doing this gig on Friday, and everybody goes, oh, I've got the kids and I'm going to a wedding, and dude, I've got soccer the next day, I'm just gonna, and so the problem that they have is something that we struggle with, and it's easy to fall into it, is they keep marketing to the same people every day, every time. So every time you get a new episode, what happens is you post out to the same mailing list, you post out to the same social network on Facebook or Instagram, and granted that might have grown by 3 or 4% in the week or the 2 weeks since your last show, but you need to push beyond that, and sometimes it takes meeting somebody completely new to just go, why didn't we think of that? And we work with an all-female writing team that produce a comedy show. It's kind of like it's not quite up there and recognised as the Monty Python show was now, but those sensibilities are shared. And they started it, and they came in and they were just like, we're going to do this right. They hired a studio, hired actors to do everything out. But then they printed flyers and they went to coffee shops because they thought the kind of person that's going to listen to this show sits in a coffee shop and listens to podcasts. And so they hit all the coffee shops in their town as soon as the shows are out and just flyed them, and they went up to people, they gave them a flyer, and now those people, that breaks out of your normal network that you're doing. And the other thing I would recommend, and this is very easy to do, if you meet somebody and they're kind of going, oh, how do I listen to your show? Go, okay, so give me your phone, and you take their phone and go on, subscribe them. Seriously, go in and subscribe them. And the other thing is, I confessed this to Apple last night, I'll always then put a 5-star review in and say nice things. So, but it's just break out of it. As I say, there are no rules.
I just heard that tip, funny enough, yesterday as well. And it was... a woman was telling about how JLD did that, actually. Okay. And she was saying, I would be appalled as a woman to even ask for that. And she wasn't sure if it was a gender thing, but she said she got out of her box, got out of her comfort zone, actually started doing that, of course, with asking someone's permission, and grabbing their phone and actually subscribing, because that's just the easiest way to make sure somebody finds your podcast.
I mean, the problem is, at the minute, and this may all change with what Apple are working on, then by the end of the year, those changes will have come in, and we're still not sure what those are, but it's still not the easiest thing to do. All right, we're getting there. We're getting so close. You've got Android and Apple now, and the car's coming off the production line. But still, and I've had the chance to try these out, and it's close. The podcasts are on the first screen there. It's a click, bang, and you're just about almost there. But it's still behind what the radio has got, which is one push and it's on. That's where we need to get.
And there's so many different applications that you can actually subscribe to. So which one do you go to? It's
well.
I would recommend try as many different ones as you can.
Right.
So,
what was the question?
No, I'm asking for subscribers sometimes is which one do they go to, and how do you send them there? And there's a one too many steps instead of, like you said, for radio, just a click. Yep. And so Drew, what were you going to say about the getting more followers and how to increase your audience and grow?
Well, I'll second what Anthony said, which was, the personal networking is very good. Just being able to hand out, hey, check out a podcast. You ever listen to it? Here's my card. You can listen to it. That's one. But second thing would be to take pieces of your show and break them out into little bits, little quotable bits, right? And then post them on social media and have a hook, right? So we did a show last night that said, basically, Jeffrey ranks the following things. What do you think, right? And then you get to vote, and then you got to go figure out what Jeffrey said, right? And then so that ends up getting them into the podcast. So I see a podcast as like, probably 5 to 10 different little social media opportunities that you can sort of hook into there. So it's like people can engage with your content in different ways, and then they end up at your podcast.
I'm just thinking about this, and I've thought about that before, but as an audio form, could you put it up as almost like a video on YouTube and just have audio playing with just an image?
Right.
Or, even taking a quote from one of the episodes and putting it on an image and then posting it to Instagram. So I guess there's lots of different ways that we can actually share the information and then say, link in bio to actually listen and subscribe to the podcast.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. People absorb and consume content, in ways that we don't really know. So you try to reach them where they're at and then bring them into the audio content. That's what
I love that. So actually, sharing it on different social media platforms, that's definitely one action we could take. And then, putting it into little bites. And then also
I was going to say, being guests on other people's podcasts is effective, especially ones that are related to what you do.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Hey.
Throw that through. One thing I would just chip in with there is audio clips do not perform well on social media, but there's some great tools out there which will take your audio and convert it into a waveform that moves so it acts like a video, and we use that tool and it's been very effective. So then we've got a 30-second clip of the show which we can pop on Instagram, and that reaches a different audience, and Instagram's very good for interaction. All the social media platforms have different ways and reaches, and again, come back to what we say, if you just do Facebook, you will only get Facebook people. If you just do Twitter, you'll only get Twitter people. You need to do them all, and it's hard and there's a lot of work, but you've got to.
I absolutely love social media. I'm a huge proponent about that, but I also like how sometimes people forget that we can have real life interactions. And one of the biggest things that I look at, what you said, is actually talking to someone, grabbing their phone and subscribing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I was actually, you mentioned it earlier about the flyers. And this was something that I learned yesterday and actually going to implement to help spread the podcast is, create a real event, go out and actually give people stickers, put business cards in coffee shops where people might be, prone to listening to the podcast. So I think we've got a lot of value today. You guys have shared so much. I'm just incredible. The networking, just meeting you guys has been fantastic. So I really appreciate both of you being here today. Sure. Recording live at Podcast Movement. Yeah. This has been a lot of fun. So I just want to say thank you to Ant from
Abrupt Audio. Check us out, abruptaudio.com. We do blogs, we do reviews, and we do like 7 or 8 of our own podcasts. And if you need help with editing, mixing, mastering, or just ideas, come to us, give us a call.
Fantastic. And Drew from?
Drew Adams from the American Podcast Company. You can find us at americanpodcast.co.
Excellent, guys. Remember, every single episode, it's all about taking action. Knowing is not enough. You have to take action because that's the only way you're going to get real results. We'll see you next time. If you guys enjoyed the show and learned something of value, the one ask that we have is please go subscribe. If you'd like to leave us a 5-star rating and review, that definitely helps us get our message out there. Because each week I'm going to interview amazing people, and I want to be able to give you more and more tools and strategies that get you real results. Feel free to connect with me on Facebook or Instagram at Corey Corpodian, or just visit the website at unleashsuccess.com. Remember, knowing is not enough. Knowledge alone is not power. Action is. Because action is the only way to get the results you want in life and truly live the life of your dreams. So go take some action. Subscribe to the podcast and get ready to unleash success in you.